Feel free to tell us those stories. We don't have to follow the script. This is just ideas of things I can ask you in case, we're all kind of at a loss as to what to say next. So.
In case I blank out?
No, in case I blank out.
What, Grandpa?
Okay, are you ready? Have you started it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I edited the first part out, so.
Oh, okay. All right. This is March 19th, 2006, and we're here doing an interview.
It's my dad's birthday.
Oh, it is? Oh, wow. That's an occasion.
Or I wouldn't be here. Oh, dear.
But I'm wanting to find out a little bit about your life, and especially about your younger life, about the family you were raised in. Can you tell me a little bit about your family, your parents, their names, and...
Is it on now?
Yes, it's on.
Thanks. Go ahead, or am I supposed to say something?
Well, tell me about your parents. Tell me what their names were and what they were like.
My mother was Lucy Isabel Watson Cahill, and she married Leslie James Cahill on the 22nd of December 1923 in Boulder, Colorado, where he was working. They were engaged 3 years because his father had died and he thought he had to help raise the other children. He was in the Navy before that. And then he got a job with a friend that was in the Boulder, Colorado building. Anyway, he was up on, looked like railroad tracks up in the air, riveter or something for the company. And she always wanted to go back to the mountains to live, but she finally made it just before she died. She died in Tremont, in Utah in 1982. And Daddy died in 1975 while he would come out here to visit. Had everything up to date so that when they went back, nothing had to be taken care of. Only she sold the house and moved into Tremont with my other sister. I had twin sisters, and Mother lost 2 sons a year before me and a year before the twins, so she didn't have a boy, so my name was Pat, so I was the boy.
So you got to be the boy. What did your parents look like?
Normal people, I guess.
Were they tall, short, dark?
No, Daddy wasn't too tall, and Mother was 5'2", and I think Daddy 5'8" maybe. But they were thin in their younger days, and then they got heavier later, like everybody. And then my grandmother was the one I could take my troubles to. My father's mother died when I was 6 or 7, and Daddy's mother died, and Daddy's mother died, and Mother's father died just a year apart when I was 6 or 7.
Okay.
So my grandmother remarried and had lived 35 years with him, but she lived to be 88. My grandmother that was extra precious to me. She listened to me when my mother didn't.
What was her name?
Patricia Isabel Jane Mays Johnson Watson Johnson.
Did she live near you?
At times when I grew up, she did. We'd go visit her every night. And then she moved into Kansas City and Texas later on. So in Webb City, Missouri, where she died. But during the war, he went to work for my uncle down in Texas, and I went back for her funeral. She was a special person.
Did she ever tell you any stories about her childhood or about her parents?
She was 8 when she saw her first train and came into Missouri, my grandmother. And they left. Her father was a school teacher, and he went in and taught the Indians in Seneca, Missouri. And I took her down. She showed me a house where they lived at the time that they were in that area. And I have pictures of that. Then I went back with a tape recorder and asked her to tell me how she joined the church, and she says, "You know that?" And I said, "No, I don't." And my father never joined the church, but my mother went to cottage meetings, and my grandmother had 8 children, so she said she couldn't go to church, so they'd have to come to her or something like that. So my dad sent him to her, despite him not being a member. But anyway, he never did join, but he was master of the Masonic Lodge, and they did everything they could for the community. They got us a tennis court, and he took part of the Masonic Lodge building and made it into the post office, and so they could get some rental out of it instead of just storing stuff in it. And all my life he was always doing something for the community. He came to Hillfield and got a fire truck, and I don't know how they got it back to Missouri, but anyway, they got it back there, so they had a homemade fire truck at that time. Then, when he died, they were working on a new bridge or a new road into the next town, because they got flooded when we had the spring floods. We couldn't get out of town on either road. And the third road, when it got flooded, everything was flooded.
How old was your father when he died?
If he'd have lived that year, he'd have been 79. If my mother had lived, she'd have been 80 that year. But they didn't make it to those birthdays, so I've outlived both of them right now.
Now tell me a little bit about your brothers and sisters. Where were you?
You started to tell about how the missionaries, or Grandpa finished telling the story about.
Oh, about how she joined the church.
Yeah.
Yes, I'd like to hear that.
My grandfather joined first, and he heard them sing Love at Home, and that converted him. And Grandma, like I said, she had little children, so she felt like she could stay home and cook and feed them, but she didn't get out to meetings like she would have liked to have got out of. And then her second husband come to town, wanted to know who a good LDS widow was, and that's how we got Grandpa Johnson.
So tell me a little about your brothers and sisters then. You were what, second or?
I was second, but both brothers were stillborn, and my mother had to have the twin cesarean because they said she couldn't have any pains or it had killed her and the twins. So I grew up over here sucking my thumb where these twins were over here on Mother and Daddy's lap.
What were your sisters' names? Or all the kids' names?
First boy was Leslie James Jr., and the second one was Leslie Jean. And Billy, the twins were Billie Jean and Betty June Cahill, Nell, and Billie Jean Fredrickson. She died 20 years ago, so.
What do you remember your father telling you about his childhood or his parents?
Not much, but they got to go to Ireland to meet his cousins over there. His father was from Ireland, and he was a little bit older than Grandma at that time when they married. And Uncle Pat was a brother. He came over from Ireland, but he went back and married his girlfriend, and Grandpa and got all the Irish community property, whatever you want to call it. And Grandpa stayed and married my grandmother and was in the mining business, and guess he lost all the money he ever made on it, and then he went out on a farm with the kids, and that was when Daddy went into the Navy. But Mother and Daddy were engaged when she was 18, but they didn't get married till she was 21, I think.
Why don't you tell a bit about the Circle K mine?
Well, I lived in a town that was undermined, and I've got pictures that shows 3 different levels of
Tunneling or?
drifts, I think they call them, where they drifted back in. Had to leave pillars of dirt to keep the town from falling in, but one area did fall in. They call it the Circle Cave, and that was my thrill to go over there and see the mining. And Daddy, they took the dirt out of the mine up to a mill across this road from it, and that's where my dad was supervisor, and I got to tell people how they took the minerals out of the rock. And
What kind of mining was it?
lead and zinc mines. They got very little silver and gold down there, but I think they did get some, but nothing to compared to Kennecott.
This was in Missouri.
Orinoco, Missouri. And the town was named Minersville at first, and then a cyclone wiped it out, and then they named it Minersville. There's another miners' bill in Missouri, so they named it Orinoco.
So tell the story about how it got its name.
If they didn't hit ore, they didn't get to go, I think, to the World's Fair, but that's my version. There's 2 or 3 versions of it on the internet.
So it was or no go, huh?
Yeah.
My dad had a prospect right over on the side of it, and you had to be let down in a bucket, and somebody had to come and lift you back up, and he paid the guy that did that, letting him down and back up more than he brought home, and Mother used to say that she didn't get as much to spend as the ones that, the other one had a larger family. Daddy felt sorry for him.
Then, did he end up owning a couple of trucks there toward the end or whatever?
No, he had a lease on the Red Dog mine between Webb City and Orinoco, and he decided instead of bringing the dirt up and piling in piles like we had all over the place back home, he'd put the dirt back in the ground and be one thing that they didn't have to fight later on. But anyway, they had 3 trucks they took apart and put down in the ground, and they put them back together, and they're still down there in the water. And there was a piece of paper, he was going to make $75,000 the first week that he started the mill, but the flood came and he worked 56 hours trying to fight the flood, and they put trees and bales of hay and everything down a drill hole that never got bothered before, and this time the river went over and the river went down in it, so
Flooded it, huh?
it's still a scuba diving school now.
So, if the flood wouldn't have came, he would have been a very rich man, it sounds like. Then
We
floods
weren't
came and,
supposed to be rich, were we?
no.
Sometimes the Lord has other plans, doesn't he? Well, you told us a little bit about your grandparents, but did you know both sets of grandparents? Were they all living?
My grandfather Cahill died before they were married, and then I was 6 or 7 when she died. I can half remember, and if I went out to the farm, I knew I could stay longer if I told her I was hungry, and she wouldn't let me leave unless I had crackers
So
and
where
milk
was
or
their
bread
farm?
and milk.
Where was their farm?
North of Orinoco, about 3 miles north of the Circle K. Then they moved into Webb City just before she died. She died in Webb City, and the funeral was in 424 North Roan Street, Webb City, Missouri.
Were your parents quite strict parents?
With me, yes. The twins got by with murder. I couldn't go across town to play with anybody, or, you know what I mean, but they had the gang there all the time.
Were you always in trouble, or they just wouldn't ever let you have the opportunity?
No, both. I'm never in trouble, that's my middle name.
Well, what did you do for holidays? Did you go to your grandparents then, or was this something you did?
No, for the holidays we usually went to a park and had a picnic, and other friends would go, and 2 or 3 families would go every time, usually to Carthage, Missouri. And then we'd have a case of pop and watermelon. Oh
Fried
dear.
chicken?
Oh, definitely fried chicken. Mother gets fried chicken that dropped off the bone without even looking at it. I didn't get that characteristic in my life. I burned it or had it too hot or too cold or something. Same way with pancakes, they were either too doughy or too burnt. And Clive liked the doughy ones, and his dad liked the burnt ones.
So there was somebody always happy, huh? No matter how you cooked them.
Killed me, and then I didn't want them burnt, and mine would burn.
What kind of traditions did your family have at Christmas?
Mother made date pudding and date bars, and my kids don't like dates, so it was too much work when I had to do it. So we always went out and found black walnuts and got stained with black walnut juice, and we didn't have any pecans around our area, but up north there were, and they were the small ones, and they're the best chicken ever, for flavor there ever was. But
So where did Grandma Cahill learn to make divinity? Was that from Grandma Johnson?
I don't think so. Grandma made pies more than anything. Mother made cake every day during the Depression, but she didn't make pies. She made rolls, but never made a loaf of bread till Marion was little. And I told her, I says, don't heat that oven for one loaf of bread, but she didn't listen to me anymore, and she did when I was little. It was so hot back there she'd eat the oven, and the house kitchen was quite small, and I says, oh, make a couple more loaves. Nope. Somebody in the church had made one loaf, and it was extra good, and that's all she'd make. If anybody belonged to the church, she did what they told her to do.
Did Grandpa Cahill have a garden all the time? Or just
We had a garden up at Grandma Johnson's. Before that land that he had the garden on, he tried to buy it and fell across the street that undermined the whole town, wouldn't sell it to us. And after Grandpa worked 56 hours, he gave it to Grandpa. So that's where we got our garden and our place to play croquet in front. We played there all the time because it was a vacant lot, but it didn't belong to us. So he'd plant 2 or 3 gardens, and there wouldn't be any rains, and they'd dry up, and the minute it rained, he planted another one. If he didn't plant potatoes St. Patrick's Day, 2 days ago, he didn't plant potatoes. They wouldn't grow.
What was the soil like there? Was it clay like we have out here?
A lot of rocks, but it was a mining area, and it wasn't as much farmland right there. People did have pasture land, we called it, but on up they grew different things, but not like.
So was there a railroad, or what was it called behind Grandma and Grandpa's house?
Streetcar track.
Yeah, a streetcar track. Is
They're
that
gonna,
when you
they're
grow
gonna
up?
make the streetcar depot into a museum. They're trying right now, to sell cookbooks to pay for it to be a museum, but I got to walk the railroad tracks, and Grandpa fenced it in for a pasture.
So, was it cars running when you were younger?
And Mother rode the streetcar to work, but I never saw him.
Where did your mother work?
Oh, she had to quit school in the 10th grade, and she worked at a bakery and rolled cigars and tied leather purses and billfolds. Can't remember what they called it when they tie them all the way around the edge. Lace them. And Daddy, he worked for Eagle Pitcher Mining Company for many, many years, and after the mill closed down there in Ornogo, he went to Joplin to the smelter. And he was the maintenance man there, so he could fix anything, and he couldn't fix it, he sure tried.
Did your folks make a big fuss about birthdays, or what was the tradition in your family?
Oh, we knew we had a birthday and Christmas, but I'm the one that didn't like holidays. They enjoyed them, but after I came to Utah and the kids couldn't be with my parents, I made life miserable for everybody.
No, I don't think so. Oh, how long did you have I thought it was really neat when I was there as a kid, because they had a double outhouse instead of a single.
We went up to Virginia City, Montana, and they had a triple high one for a hotel.
So did they, I guess they had an outhouse the whole time?
Didn't have a bathroom till Marion was born. Daddy got us fixed down in Murray at the same time as Grandma and Grandpa.
I remember the outhouse, yeah, but Grandma and Grandpa's are special because there's 2, so you didn't have to wait as long.
And I'd get in there, and where the moon was, well, they'd throw hickory nuts through that at me. My twin sisters, sin twisters,
How much younger were they?
4 years younger.
Just young enough to be pests, huh?
And then one was real tiny, and boy, she could hit hard, and Mother'd say, "Little Bill can't do that." The other sister's in rehab at Tree Mountain right now and hasn't walked for 4 or 5 years, and got a feeding tube in her, and she can just whisper and doesn't remember the past, and She remembers you when you're there, but an hour later she doesn't remember you've been there, so.
Which sister is that?
Betty, her husband still lives up there, and his birthday was St. Patrick's Day, and I called, but didn't get an answer. I haven't been up for quite a while, and I feel bad that I don't make it up, but that old car just knows how to make it to Syracuse.
That's as far as it'll go, huh? Well, since it's your husband's birthday, tell us a little bit about him. What he was like, what he looked like.
No, he was just a soldier that come to church, and he had never been baptized, and his brother that never went to church all the time, you've got to be baptized before you go overseas, and he went AWOL and came into the branch there to be baptized, and we had gone down to near Branson, Missouri, to the only vacation we ever had, and I asked my grandmother, I said, were there any soldiers there? And she said, yes, one got baptized, and I said, were they good looking? And she looked at me like, you crazy kid. And he didn't come back for 6 months, so I didn't meet him until March of 43, and he was dating somebody, I think, out in Kansas, and I don't think he'd come back for another weekend or so, but anyway, he liked my mother's cooking, and he liked to make ice cream, and so Mother always had missionaries or soldiers home for dinner, and then we had to go back for church, and Grandpa worked 4 to 12, so I don't know how we got back to church with him. I don't even remember. There wasn't any buses or anything going back and forth, but anyway, he left, and I met him in March, and I think in June he went to California, and we wrote all that time till November, and he came back and was there 4 or 5 days when we got married, and I went to Kansas City with him. I know he met grandmother up there, and he went back to Salt Lake so I could be with his folks a day, coming and going. And Christmas time, that was in November the 9th, 1943, and in Christmas time I came out to meet his parents. His father was killed in a coal mine when he was 5, so he didn't remember his father at all, but I met most of his aunts and uncles and his stepfather's sister, and there was 6 Ingrams and 6 Kents, so there's 12 children, so he quit in 10th grade to help raise a family too, and he never complained, he never told the kids about the war or anything. He tried to get in the Army, and he and his friends went to join, and he was in 4F, and they wouldn't take him, or they put him in 4F and wouldn't take him, and then he was ran over with a truck for helping Uncle Aaron with a load of coal. He slipped under the wheels, and 5 doctors didn't think he would live, but one decided they'd do surgery, and he made it. And when I was born, they said I didn't have enough life in me to live, so they put me in hot and cold water, and the doctor went and laid down, and my grandmother was there, and the lady, Mrs. Gill, next door that helped as a midwife, and the doctor's wife put me in hot and cold water for 3 or 4 hours, and for 3 weeks they didn't think I'd make it, and I made it to 80 years, whether I should have or not.
So where was Dad stationed?
Daddy was at Camp Crowder, Missouri, and then he was in California. He was
So where's Camp Crowder? Where's it close
down near Neosho, Missouri. I'd never seen Camp Crowder till you drove me to Arkansas that time. Then I said he couldn't find anybody in Utah, so he found me, and I still don't know why. So
Where else was he stationed?
I was trying to think. They're in California, where he was with Patton's 3rd Army out in the middle of the desert training center, I think they called it. It was about 20 some odd miles from Indio, and I went there and stayed a couple of months with him. And he came in on weekends and one night during the week, and the other company didn't come in during the week, so they squawked, and then he couldn't come in. Then he went on maneuvers, was gone for a couple of weeks, and then he wanted me to get back to Missouri before he left to go overseas, so he'd know I was back there safe and sound. And when I got to Denver, with morning sickness, I threw up all over my suitcase, and when I finally raised up, everybody was off the bus but me. And he didn't know that Clive was born till he was 3 weeks old, and he didn't get to see him till 6 days before his first birthday, so.
So where was he actually when I was born?
Oh, I think in the Battle of Bulge or in Luxembourg, I don't really.
So that's why I tell everybody that my mom and dad were both in the Battle of the Bulge at the same time.
I didn't know what having babies was all about, and the lady at the store said, "Don't you feel good?" And I said, "I don't know." About midnight that night, Mother decided she better stay in bed with me, and she didn't want to be in on delivering a baby. Oh, she was scared to death she'd have to someday in her life, and so we got to the hospital, and then I walked for, I think he was born just before noon. Anyway, the doctor come in and says I wasn't progressing, so they, what did they do? Anyway, when he was born, he had sores on both sides of his ears with, I can't remember what they use now, even help babies.
The forceps?
The forceps. Made scabs on each side, and on my left side, he cried the whole time, and I cried with him.
So what was the doctor's name?
M.S. Slaughter. Melville Slaughter, and he's an osteopath, and they had an osteopathic hospital in the city, and I thought it was a big building until I went back later. And it
What's the name of the hospital?
What was that?
The name of the hospital?
Jane Chin Hospital.
I remember I saw it once, but then when I went back to dental school, they tore it down.
Now they have to go to Joplin, I think, for a hospital, but Orinoco didn't have a hospital, that's for sure, but
So where did you go to school?
500 people. Orinoco. What was the name of it? I can't think of what they named schools then. Seems like it's the name of the dictionary, but I'm not sure.
Was it a square, 2 or 3 story brick building or something?
2 or 3 story brick building, then they added a gymnasium on for me to play basketball in.
And they've since torn it down, haven't they?
We got a new school here, yes, Truman, out in the country now, and everybody's bused out there. They've got 2 or 3 little communities out in the country, I'd call it.
So
Orinoco's 3 times bigger than it was when I was there, but it's not the Orinoco I knew.
What about Orinoco's swimming pool? How did that come about?
The Orinoco swimming pool, we had Grandma Johnson, Grandma Cahill, me, and all my kids swam in a basement of an old building. And they were pumping the water out of the ground so they could mine. And oh, it came out in about a 6-inch pipe and cold as. Took it 3 days to warm up, and by that time it got dirty to be changed again. They filled it up with
Was there
dirt.
a tornado or something that moved the building off the foundation?
I don't
Seems
remember.
like I heard that. Seems like Grandma told me that story. That
Could have been.
so then the foundation had its basement there, so they made it into a swimming pool.
They filled it with dirt, they say now, so that there's no swimming pool. But
Did you experience tornadoes?
lightning would hit trees around the house, but not tornadoes. But they did out in Kansas, and we went out and saw the damage. But I saw the damage in Kansas City one time when I went back home. It really tore out the edge of Kansas City. But I never was in one. The town was wiped off at one time, they claimed, but I wasn't born then.
Tell me a little bit about your husband's family and about how his father died, about that disaster.
His father was killed in the Castle Gate mine in 1920, and he was killed 40, say 50, because 50 people associate 50, I think, easier than 40. Later, why he was killed the same way in a mine up by Moon Canyon, Francis and Woodland, Utah, back in like on a deer hunting road. And the kids got to go up there and see the area the other day, but
Coral Loop Road is what it's the road called now.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they call it Coral Loop Road.
Well, that road that they went on was not there, I don't think, when he was killed, but it's been 32.5 years, so almost 33 years.
So how did that accident happen?
Well, somebody had gone in with a bulldozer and made a big trench, and when you follow rocks, you follow usually a vein, and I have seen him out in Nevada after petrified wood with a shovel handle, 5 feet plus his arm going back. This is the last rock I'm gonna get. And when you get it in the ground, it's wet and beautiful. You put it out, and the sun dries it out, and you wonder what that wanted to that dirty old rock. But anyway, I've had rocks all my life. My mother said I picked them up as soon as I started walking. I also picked up cigarette butts, and people had them in their mouths, so I tried to eat them. Mother wasn't too happy with me. But I made him a rock hound. I sent him to college for a quarter so I could learn where to go hunt rocks, and he learned the hardness and everything. So when he started grinding them, he appreciated the college quarter that he had. But we belonged to a rock club, and we couldn't go with him because he didn't have weekends off. So I planned the rock trips, and when we got there, he'd say, "What are we looking for?" "I don't know. Someone told me to come here." But he had gone up with a friend, stayed overnight up there once, and found quite a bit of red horn coral. And
That's the only place you can find it in the world, isn't it?
as far as I know, it is. And then this fellow, he'd lay off from Hillfield to go with him, and it rained the weekend they planned to go, and they decided to wait till the next week. And this friend went up during the week and found quite a bit, and my husband was so upset. He wished he could have been with him, and so on and so forth. And I said, "What do you want to go for? You don't do anything with it." And he said, "I just want to go one more time," which is one of our sayings about we always wanted to go back one more time. And my folks were in a bad car wreck in Kansas and got to me Sunday night. And he stayed up until about midnight when they got in. My sisters went and got him, and he left the next morning at 4 o'clock and didn't come back. So my folks were with me when he was killed.
So was he alone then? Nobody actually saw that?
There was 3 of them. And the fellow that took Clive and Les up, he went up and found them. He had been there before. I'd never been up there. We always planned to go with somebody, but we never went. I went twice afterwards, but all there was then was a big hole that a steam shovel dug out, but now they've covered that up. So Clive and Les went up last summer, and I think Shad found the most red horn coral, but it's still up there. But they're trying to cover up a lot of the mining areas so that they look like they've not been there, and replant the.
Same with the guy the 2 that were killed was a grandfather and a grandson, and the son of the father of the son was the one that found all 3 of them. So the one guy found his son and his dad up there.
Do you know what happened? Or is it always...
It just caved in on the 3 of them, and I kept in touch with the other man's wife, and I stayed awake until early in the morning, and I hadn't heard anything, and I think I was on the couch.
What was his first name? Do you know about Doc Palmer?
His name was, it's an odd name, but he went by the name of Doc anyway. Roscoe. He went by the name of Doc Palmer that was with him, and Chris, and Doc Palmer and Chris's brother went on our first rock trip down in Beaver, Utah, and Chris and the brother played with my girls, but Chris was the one that they found these arms sticking up, and it had a light around it. He said it glowed, and that's how he found the boy. And the truck light was still on, so he took the boys up, and Clive made a video of what he said about how he found him. He wrote 7 pages about the longest
So
day of my life.
So we'll want to get that to you so you put it in history.
Mhm.
Then I kept in touch with his wife, and she really had some accidents to happen to her, different than what I've gone through, but anyway, she isn't living now, but she had one son that was epileptic, and he's still living at home.
So how old were your children when your husband died?
The girls were 9, 13, and 14. The boys were married. And they say that 2 of them have had a brain concussion and can't remember too much about their dad, and it really upsets me. But I've had a brain concussion and I can still remember him, so I don't know. They've been on a boat, and both of them.
Yeah, tell her what I was doing when Dad was.
Oh, my oldest son was in Kansas City, and my folks called and they says, "We'll pay your way back on the bus to come to his graduation." I says, "I cannot." I called the bus depot, and it wasn't straight through or anything, and I says, "I can't be 3 or 4 days on the bus. My back and hips won't let me." So I went back for my son's graduation. After they said they'd pay my way on a train, then I had to go into Chicago, and I said, "No way," and I didn't want to fly, so they finally talked me into flying back there for his graduation. And when I got back, he was killed a month later, but my folks regretted that they didn't have us all to come back, and we could have done it, but Pam's folks were planning on going back, and I didn't want too many people back there to be on them, so we didn't plan. We planned to go, and then I talked myself out of it. And then they didn't go, and he said he wouldn't graduate if somebody didn't come, so I did that for a while, but my folks did, so. And they were always looking out for him, because we'd been with him for a year when he was first born. And he is a special son, so he's number 1 in more ways than one.
So, yeah, I was taking my dental board exams,
Oh.
and my dad was supposed to be a patient the next day.
Oh.
So they told me in the middle of those that he passed away.
Oh gosh.
Leslie went down to tell him, and it was on the radio, and Les had heard it on the radio, and he wanted to go up there, but he didn't know where to go, and they weren't telling names at that time, but when he found out it was his dad, I would have known who it was, but I didn't hear it. I took the girls down to church, and they went to camp, and the dentist that taught Clyde into being a dentist, he was our bishop, and he said something, and I told him, I says, "Well, Clyde's supposed to be his patient tomorrow, but I don't know whether he will or not." So, but no one ever came to tell me. I called Sid Palmer's house, and his mother-in-law was there with his mother and wife, and I finally, I says, "Did they find him?" And she said yes, and I says, "Were they dead?" And she told me to listen to the radio, and I said, "I'm the other man's wife." And I says, "Were they dead?" And she said yes, and I says, "All of them?" And she said yes, and that's how I found out.
Mm.
And then the doctor came at noon and wanted to know if he could do anything. And my husband's biggest check was on top of the TV. He'd never made that much money in the 28 years he worked for the railroad, and he worked a lot of overtime. And he came in and he says something about we were going to take my folks up to Virginia City, and what's the name of that other town up in Montana, a mile away, but anyway, I said, "I got a feeling we're not going to go very far," and he says, "Oh yes we are, $300 is going in my pocket and we're going." But he took off and went rock hunting, and he didn't get to go.
So you were left to raise these 3 little girls. How did you do that?
My health broke, and I laid on the couch and Jan had come and said, I don't like to go to school and leave you, and I said, I'll be right here when you get home. And I don't know how they put up with me.
And what happened is right after I took my state boards, then July 3rd I had to leave to go in the military, and then I ended up being stationed in Alaska.
And I took the girls up in Alaska next year. We planned to go up there and rock hunt because he had a 6-week vacation coming the next year from the railroad, and we were going to rock hunt coming up and coming back and enjoy Alaska, but all the family's been there but him.
How did you support yourself?
Well, the railroad had a plan where the widows, as long as the kids were in school, I got so much and they got so much a month, and then when they got into college, if they hadn't got married, why, they still got the benefits of college. And 2 of them took advantage of it, and the oldest girl didn't. But then, after a while, I went to work at IRS for 2 seasons, and I didn't get any benefits there, so my mother was anxious for me to get on Hillfield or somewhere else, so I would have benefits, and I got to work about 2 weeks when she died, so then I had to lay off a week to go up and go through her things with my 2 sisters.
And how did she die?
She had a 2-bedroom mobile home in my sister's backyard, and she was holding her great-grandson that, and I called, and she
Which one
says,
was that?
what?
Which grandson was that?
It was Renee's first little boy, Zach. Anyway, she told me that he needed a clean diaper, and she didn't have any for him, and I said, oh, use a dish towel. And she said, I won't use a dish towel on him. So she took him back over to my sister's and told her husband to get a bottle and she'd feed the baby. And when my brother-in-law took the baby bottle to my mother, why, something was wrong, and he grabbed the baby, and mother died. Oh, my great-grandbaby, so she died happy, and my husband died happy rock hunting, so I'll be the one in the care center. Already been in 2 or 3.
Well, sometimes it seems like it'd be a nice thing to just be able to go, huh? Just be able to go
That's the
out.
way we all want it, but not very many of us get it.
Tell me a little bit about your brothers and sisters. What you did to entertain yourself when you were kids? How things have changed since then?
Oh, we had a tent over the fence line. We wanted to cut a hole so we could go back and forth to the neighbor kids. And one was 4 years older than me and one 2 years younger, and we played school and we played house, and we had the hoop and cough, and down the street was Ogden's, believe it or not, Ogden, Utah, and Ogden's in Arnold, Missouri. But her granddaughter had come, and we didn't like her, and we hoped she'd get hoop and cough from us. And we'd go out in the street and we'd play hopscotch, and we played marbles. I played marbles and jacks, and Daddy played jacks when he come to see us. Anyway.
Did you play Parcheesi or Chinese checkers or anything you grew up to?
No, Monopoly and Chinese checkers and pick-up sticks and things like that.
Oh, that's right, I remember playing that.
Listen to the radio and Little Orphan Annie.
Ask her about her high school basketball career.
Oh, we better hear about that.
Oh, I played basketball for 3 years for Ornogle, and when I tell the kids I played basketball and high jump, they act like I saw it, imagined it. And they can't figure out how.
Tell a little bit about what you could do and couldn't do on the basketball court back in those days.
At that time, we had to they had it often thirds, and then they have to. Mother made the basketball suits, and we made chains like for crocheting out of chain or with our hands for a chain, and she used that for rickrack. And she painted the numbers on her suits, and she made most of them. And like I said, they were always doing something for the community, and when the church was building new buildings, she'd make pecan rolls and sell them, and she liked to make divinity and caramel plus the pecans on them. And we went to 3 miles away for Webb City Church, and then she had to go for job into the church after I left home. And Carthage, they wouldn't even let missionaries in, and now they've got a church there. In fact, the Webb City Church is halfway between Carthage and Webb City, so they both use it.
Did Grandpa Cahill used to go to church as much when he was younger as when he was older? Did he always?
When I went to church with Grandpa Cahill, he dumped us at Sunday school and he went to the mortuary. Oh, what a father. And he would forget to come pick us up sometimes, and we'd be waiting. And then he'd go try to sleep when he went with Grandma, but he worked nights, so I never got to go to church at that time. They had Sunday school and church and mutual during the week, and I didn't like